All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into the compelling connection between discipline and destiny. Really getting to the bottom of how that inner strength, that self-control we all have inside, shapes who we become and what we achieve.
And our guidepost for this journey is Ryan Holiday's thought-provoking book, Discipline is Destiny, which serves as our core material for really dissecting this essential ingredient for a fulfilling life.
I completely agree. And to really bring this idea home, let's start by thinking about that ancient Greek myth, the story of Hercules at the crossroads. Picture this young, aspiring hero standing for two paths.
Oh, yeah, I know the story.
One presented by, beautiful goddess, promises a life of pure pleasure and ease, no hardship at all. But the other path, kind of symbolized by this more austere figure, dressed all in white, offers no immediate rewards, just the promise of fulfillment earned through effort and sacrifice, the path that would truly lead him to his heroic potential.
It's a choice that we all face in some way, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's really striking that even John Adams, one of the founding fathers of the United
Oh, yeah.
States, was so moved by this image that he actually considered it for the seal of the United States.
Yeah.
This goes to show how deeply this idea resonates, like it's a fundamental choice, not just for one person, but for a whole nation.
What makes the Hercules myth so timeless, I think, is how simply it captures that human struggle between instant gratification and long-term fulfillment. And that harder path, the path of virtue, was seen in the ancient world through the lens of four key virtues: courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. These were the anchors, or the cardo in Latin, that a good and meaningful life hinged on.
It's interesting how those values are so consistent, right?
Yeah. And the really interesting thing is that these weren't just confined to Greek or Roman thought. They carried over into Christian teachings, even pop up in Eastern philosophies. They're like these universal values, all intertwined.
Now, if we shift gears to our modern world, particularly in developed nations, we see an unprecedented level of abundance and freedom. The average person today has comforts and opportunities that were inconceivable just a few centuries ago. Think about it. We have heat, air conditioning, more food than we can sometimes even eat. We can travel the world. People can pursue different careers. They can speak their minds.
But even with all that, you still see this kind of undercurrent of dissatisfaction.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, right? Why hasn't all this abundance led to, widespread happiness? Is there something we're missing?
Well, this gets to the difference between true liberty and just license. Like Eisenhower said, freedom is actually only the opportunity for self-discipline. Without that built-in self-restraint, what the ancients called temperance, all our freedoms can easily lead us astray. You see this idea popping up in all sorts of ancient philosophies and religions, the Greeks, the Stoics, and many others. They all recognize the danger of unchecked freedom and really stress the importance of self-control to keep us from ruin, from imbalance, from a lack of true contentment.
And it's a good point, right? Because just being able to make choices doesn't mean you'll always make the best ones. And this idea of self-discipline, it's not some elitist thing. It's something that benefits everyone.
Yeah.
And you could even argue, especially those who are facing disadvantages.
Right, because the less room you have for error, the more important that ability to be disciplined in your actions and choices becomes.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, we're all fighting this internal battle between what we might call our higher selves and our lower selves. It's like the can versus the should. And that ties back to that Herculean crossroads, do we give in to instant gratification, or do we choose that harder path of virtue and long-term growth?
It's a question that we're all wrestling with in one form or another.
So what does self-discipline look like in practice? Well, it's about consistently working hard towards our goals, being able to say no to distractions and temptations, developing those good habits, and setting healthy boundaries.
That's tough, though. Saying no is one of the hardest things to do.
Oh, it definitely is. Self-discipline also involves training and preparing ourselves for whatever challenges come our way, ignoring those urges and external pressures that might derail us, managing our emotions, which, let's be honest, can be a roller coaster. And then, of course, persevering through difficult times.
Right.
It's that delicate balance of giving our all to what truly matters, but also being wise enough to know what to resist, what to hold back for the greater good.
And it's important to remember that temperance, which is a key part of this whole discipline thing, isn't about denying yourself all joy. It's not about being miserable. It's about having command over yourself, physically, mentally, spiritually, holding yourself to a high standard even when nobody's watching. That's the real meaning of temperance. Not just abstinence, but command.
I think that's such an important distinction.
It is, yeah.
Because ultimately, this discipline, it's both a predictor of success and a determinant of greatness. It increases the likelihood that you'll reach your goals. But even more importantly, it ensures that regardless of the outcome, you can be proud of the effort you put in, the integrity you maintained along the way. The flip side, unfortunately, is that a lack of discipline can lead you down a dangerous path, really eroding your character.
And to illustrate all this, let's look at the incredible example of Lou Gehrig, the Iron Horse of baseball. His record of 2,130 consecutive games played for the New York Yankees is a testament to a truly amazing level of physical and mental toughness. What's even more impressive is that he played through all sorts of injuries. He had fevers, debilitating migraines, even came back after being hit in the head by a fastball. It's just mind-blowing.
His streak really is legendary.
It is. But sometimes it overshadows his other accomplishments on the field. I mean, think about it. He had a .340 lifetime batting average, which was even higher in the postseason. 493 home runs, held the record for Grand Slams for decades. He was one of the very few to achieve the Triple Crown, leading the league in batting average, home runs, and runs batted, and all in the same season. He was a 2-time MVP, a 7-time All-Star, part of 6 World Series championships, and, the first Yankee to have his number retired. That's saying something.
It really is. He wasn't just defined by his streak. He was an incredible all-around player.
Absolutely. And his endurance, it wasn't some fluke either. Even as a kid, growing up in New York City, the only surviving child of German immigrants, his determination was clear. He wasn't naturally gifted athletically, actually. A childhood friend even remembers him being kind of uncoordinated. But he used that teasing as motivation to improve. Joined a local German gymnastics club and started to develop that physique that would become so iconic. He didn't just wake up an athlete. He made himself into one through sheer force of will.
His upbringing definitely seems to have played a role in shaping that disciplined character.
Yeah, his father wasn't very reliable, always making excuses, which was the opposite of his mother. She worked tirelessly as a cook, laundress, baker, cleaning lady, just to give her son a better life. That contrast must have really ingrained in Gehrig this deep respect for hard work and dependability. And, even as a kid, he never missed a day of school, almost foreshadowing his commitment to the game later on.
And that's even more impressive when you consider he grew up in poverty.
Right. A classmate even remembers him coming to school in winter without a coat or a hat. But those hardships seemed to only make him more resilient, more determined to overcome whatever was thrown at him.
There's a story about the Stoic philosopher Cleanthes, who would wear minimal clothing, even in freezing weather, just to demonstrate his endurance and indifference to discomfort. It makes me think of Gehrig. Even after he became one of the highest-paid athletes in America, he rarely wore a hat or vest in the New York winters. It was like he was impervious to the cold. It wasn't until he got married that he started wearing a coat regularly, and even then, it seemed like it was more for his wife's peace of mind than for his own comfort.
For Gehrig, baseball wasn't just a game. He saw it as this higher calling, a profession that demanded both mastery and taking meticulous care of your body, and he lived that ethos fully. One teammate even said that physical fitness was almost a religion to him.
He took it very seriously.
He did. He even admitted to being a slave to baseball, but he meant it in a good way. He was grateful for the opportunity to play. And all that dedication definitely paid off. When he was at bat, his intensity was palpable. Those powerful legs generated an incredible amount of force. And even though some teammates initially teased him about his piano legs, he was actually really fast. He stole home multiple times during his career. He was this blend of power, hustle, and, believe it or not, finesse.
He was the whole package.
He really was.
While other players might have had more raw talent or flashier personalities, few could match Gehrig's work ethic, his dedication to training, and his love for the game. And when you have that kind of deep intrinsic motivation, compromise and shortcuts just don't enter the picture. He never even flipped his bat in frustration. The only time he ever got reprimanded was when he was caught playing stickball with kids after a game. He just loved playing that much he couldn't resist.
It's almost like he was a kid at heart,
Yeah, and that's kind of endearing in a way.
It is. But it's important to remember that even someone as disciplined as Gehrig wasn't immune to those internal struggles that we all face. There must have been days when he felt awful, when he wanted to quit, when doubt crept in, when the exhaustion was overwhelming. He wasn't superhuman. He just built this incredible mental fortitude. He learned to ignore those negative voices and focus on his commitment. He understood the danger of compromise, how once you start lowering your standards, it's hard to climb back up. He knew baseball was tough, but he pushed through anyway. In a time when excuses were common, he just kept showing up.
And that's where that famous anecdote with Joe DiMaggio comes in, right?
Right. So DiMaggio, early in his career, went up to Gehrig and asked about an upcoming pitcher, maybe hoping for some intel that would make things easier. But Gehrig's response was classic. Never waste your time worrying about that, Joe. Just always remember that they invariably save their absolute best pitching for the New York Yankees.
It's such a simple statement, but it says so much about his mindset. Like, he expected everyone, himself included, to always bring their A game no matter what.
Exactly. It was like this understanding that with great talent and opportunity comes the responsibility to always give your best. No excuses.
And that disciplined approach, it wasn't just limited to baseball.
Right. He wasn't a big drinker, avoided frivolous pursuits. He even said, "I'm not a good time, Charlie, but I'm not a preacher and certainly not a saint." His biographer pointed out that his clean living wasn't about being smug or self-righteous. It was about his ambition to be the best baseball player he could be. He chose the most effective path to reach his goal. Taking care of his body wasn't about morals, it was strategy. And while he might have missed out on some fleeting pleasures, he knew that indulging too much would hold him back from achieving his full potential. His discipline wasn't about deprivation, it was about maximizing his potential.
It's interesting that he did experiment with drinking early on in his career. Apparently, he played really well in a game after a night of heavy drinking. He thought the alcohol calmed his nerves. But a coach, seeing the potential danger, stepped in and explained the long-term consequences for his performance. And that was the end of that experiment. Not because of some moral epiphany, but because it interfered with his primary goal of becoming a great baseball player.
Anything that could jeopardize that, he just cut it out.
He was laser focused.
And you see that focus in his personal life, too. He lived with his parents for the first 10 seasons of his major league career, took the subway to Yankee Stadium even though he was making good money. Money, to him, seemed to be more of a tool and maybe even a distraction. And there's this great anecdote about when the Yankees got new padded seats for their dugout. Gehrig actually tore off a section of the padding from his seat. He said he was getting too comfortable. He saw comfort as the enemy of his drive.
Wow, he really did take it to another level. It's like he knew that success could make you complacent, and he was determined to resist that.
Yeah. His discipline wasn't something imposed on him. It was internal. It was who he was.
And it really contrasts with his teammate, Babe Ruth. They both won the same number of batting titles, but Ruth struck out almost twice as often and struggled more with his weight. It suggests that Gehrig's self-control went beyond just the physical.
Right. It was like he had this control over his ego, too. A reporter once said that Gehrig was unspoiled, entirely without even the remotest trace of ego, vanity, or conceit. He always put the team first, even when it meant playing through pain.
And his toughness on the field was legendary.
Absolutely. There was this story where he jammed his thumb badly fielding a ball. All he said to the trainer was, "I think it might be broken." Didn't complain, just kept playing. And another time, back when they didn't wear helmets, he got knocked unconscious by a pitch. The next day, not only did he insist on playing, but he leaned into the first pitch and hit a triple, then got 2 more hits before the game got rained out. His response:
A thing like that can't stop his Dutchman.
"That's just incredible."
He was unstoppable, and his teammates clearly noticed his disciplined lifestyle. One teammate said, "There was genuinely no finer man that ever walked the face of the earth. He didn't drink any alcohol, he never chewed tobacco, and he certainly never smoked. And he made it a consistent practice to be in bed by the responsible hours of 9:30 or 10 o'clock each night." He earned so much respect for those habits.
It reminds me of that Muhammad Ali quote, "When a man can control his life, his physical needs, his lower self, he elevates himself." That was Gehrig.
And then, after all those years, his streak ended not because of an injury, but because of ALS.
Yeah.
For someone who had so much control over his body, to have it start failing him must have been incredibly difficult.
It must have been. His swing weakened, he had trouble putting on his glove, even walking became a struggle. But even then, his willpower and dedication kept him going. In 1938, while he was already in the early stages of ALS, he played in 36 games in 35 days. Doubleheaders, travel, the whole 9 yards. And he still hit .329 with 9 home runs and 38 runs batted in. That's amazing even for a healthy player.
It's almost hard to comprehend.
It is.
But eventually, he knew he couldn't keep going.
In May of 1939, he went to his manager and said, "I always told myself that the moment I felt I could no longer truly help the team anymore, I would make the decision to take myself out of the everyday lineup. I suppose that time has finally come. His manager, probably thinking they were talking about sometime in the future, was taken aback. He said, "Now." And Gehrig simply replied, "Yes, now. Please put Babe Dahlgren in at first base." He had reached his break-low point.
It's like he had this internal gauge for when he was no longer meeting his own standards. And that moment came after a routine play. He fielded a ground ball, threw to first for the out, and his teammates gave him this huge, almost overly enthusiastic round of applause. It was like they were trying to compensate for his decline, and it made him realize that he was holding them back.
It was a powerful moment of self-awareness.
It really was. And it reminded me of that famous Winston Churchill quote. Never give in, never give in, never, 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 never in nothing, great or small, large or petty. Never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. Gehrig had lived by that. Overcoming poverty, injuries, the pressure of professional sports, he resisted temptation and complacency, but he also knew, like Churchill, that there are times when you have to give in to convictions of honor and good sense. And that's what he did.
He stepped aside with grace and dignity.
The streak ended quietly in Detroit. The announcer was caught off guard and just acknowledged the record of 2,130 games. The crowd, which included Wally Pipp, the guy Gehrig had replaced all those years ago, gave him a standing ovation. Gehrig just tipped his cap and went back to the dugout. And there, his teammates saw him cry for the first time. It's a powerful reminder that even the strongest people have their limits. And Gehrig said something that day that really stuck with me. You have to consistently do your absolute best while you still have the precious chance to do so. Life is often unexpectedly short. You genuinely never know precisely when the game itself or even your own physical body will ultimately be taken away from you. Don't ever waste a single moment of it.
It's a message that we could all take to heart. And then on July 4th, 1939, he went back to Yankee Stadium one last time wearing his uniform. He was frail from the disease, but his courage and self-mastery were even more apparent. Even though he was physically declining, he was still fighting that same internal battle, the struggle to overcome his limitations. He wasn't comfortable speaking to the crowd, but he did, and his words perfectly captured the power of mastering yourself, even in the face of adversity. For the past 2 weeks, you have been reading about a bad break, he said, his voice clear and strong. Yet today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Even with his diagnosis, he chose to focus on gratitude, on the good things in his life.
It's a powerful testament to his character.
It really is.
Gehrig's legacy goes beyond just his statistics. He's an example of how discipline isn't just about achieving success. It's about pushing your limits, reaching your full potential, and facing challenges with grace and courage. The New York Times wrote that his feats were in the record books, but it was his life, the way he conducted himself, that was his real impact. His funeral was short and simple, no long eulogy, because, as the priest said, you all knew him.
And that's the ultimate compliment, isn't it?
It is.
His story makes you think, you know? You say you love what you do, but where's the proof? What's your streak? Most of us don't have the pressure of fans or contracts to stay disciplined. We don't have coaches breathing down our necks. And that lack of external pressure makes self-mastery even more important. Are we being harder on ourselves than anyone else could be? Are we pushing our boundaries, striving for excellence, staying true to our values, and building the mental toughness to conquer our weaknesses? That's the real lesson from Lou Gehrig.
It's a challenge to us all, to embrace that inner iron horse and make the most of the time we have. Well, that was a truly inspiring dive into discipline and destiny. Thank you for joining us today.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time.
Yeah.